Hi everyone. This video explains how dorm selection is decided. Suppose we have a house, let's call it Swippet's house, with 4 rising seniors in it. Ms. Howley, Miss Smith, Miss Pacelli, and Miss Hicks, all in green. And there's another house, let's call it Mulbertson, with 3 rising seniors in it. Ms. Hoffman, Ms. Coretti, and Ms. Conklin, all in orange. And going into next year, let's say the roommates want to pair up like this. We have Miss Hoffman with Miss Coretti, Miss Conklin and Miss Pacelli, Miss Smith with Miss Hicks, and Miss Howley, who doesn't have a roommate yet. Suppose the dorm deans decide that Swippet's house can only hold 4 seniors the following year. Let's look at how dorm selection would operate. The way to think about dorm selection is to think about tiers. Because they both live in Swippet's already, Miss Smith and Miss Hicks would be on the top tier, which consists of in-dorm pairs, or roommates who both come from their preferred dorm. The second tier has 2 pairs, Miss Hoffman and Miss Coretti, and Miss Conklin and Miss Pacelli. They're both considered out-of-dorm pairs because at least one roommate in the pair comes from out of the dorm. And then the third tier is the single. So in terms of deciding who gets to live in Swippet's, Tier 1 is in. On the second tier, we can only pick one pair because we can only have a total of 4 seniors. Both pairs are considered out-of-dorm pairs, so we draw names out of a hat, and it just so happens that Miss Conklin and Miss Pacelli are chosen, so they live in Swippet's next year. And that's how we decide who lives in Swippet's. Summarizing dorm selection, in-dorm pairs have preference over all other pairs, and then singles. Let's take another situation in which we have mostly rising 11th graders and 1 rising senior on the right who all lived in Swippet's this year, and some rising 11th graders and 1 rising senior who lived in Mulbertson. Again, this is how they want to live together. We have Mr. Kopeikin with Mr. Smith, Mr. Bell and Mr. Malone, Mr. Vink with Mr. Hicks, and Mr. Gunkelman and Mr. Lynch, and then Mr. McGuire with no roommate yet. We now have to decide who's going to live in Swippet's. In this case, Swippet's has a quota of 2 upper mids. Note that the 2 pairs with rising seniors, Mr. Kopeikin and Mr. Smith, and Mr. Bell and Mr. Malone, are considered 11th grade pairs because pairing always defaults to the lower grade. So we have the in-dorm pairs at the top, the other pairs on the second tier, and then the single on the third tier. So in this case, if only 2 upper mids can live in Swippet's, only the pairs on the top tier have a chance. So we draw names out of a hat, and it just so happens that Mr. Vink and Mr. Hicks are able to live there. To summarize, we have in-dorm pairs on the first tier, all other pairs on the second tier, and singles on the third tier. And that's how dorm selection is determined. If you have any questions, you're welcome to contact the Director of Dormitories, Mr. Potash.